Well, I'm here in the studio with former Detective Constable John Wedger of the Metropolitan Police. And I first got to know John, we think about 7 years ago or something like that. And John and I met at an Alternative View conference put on by Ian Crane. I think it was the Heathrow event. Seems quite a long time ago, John.
It was a while back, yeah.
It was a while back. So a brief conversation in a quiet corner of a very busy room was on the subject of child abuse and what was happening, here in the studio in London regarding child abuse. And at that very first meeting, John, you were able to say that in your opinion there were some very dark things going on in London. Of course, you were talking in general terms at that stage, but you were able to start to educate me at some of the things going on around children and the abuse of children in London. And then in the subsequent years, you've had a truly amazing story, because eventually you got to the point of becoming a whistleblower, not only on the abuse of children in London, but on the cover-up of that abuse. And in the interview that you did with me, an audio interview, which is already it's been up on the UK Column website for some months now. In that interview, you described how you became aware that children were taken out of children's homes in London. They were essentially being groomed, prostituted out. They were being given drugs to help that process. And you were disgusted to discover that this was an open secret. Children were coming out of those homes. They were going off. They were being used as child prostitutes. They were on drugs. And the authorities, who we would expect to protect those children, so the children's home itself, charities, the local authority, politicians even, and certainly the Met Police, those authorities, in your opinion, were not only not doing their job of protecting the children, they were turning a blind eye while that abuse went on. You spoke out, and the result has been a quite unbelievable attack on you by the Metropolitan Police. So we're going to say to people watching this edition of Insight, please do listen to the audio about John, because that gives you the background. You'll find that on the UK Column website. Tonight, it's a huge pleasure to have John here with me in the studio. And what we're going to do is follow some of the subsequent events. So John, just very briefly, what happened from the time that you whistle blew on this really outrageous abuse of children in London?
Well, I mean, like I mentioned in our audio interview, I genuinely thought that as soon as I whistle blew that things would start going in the right direction. I thought I'd get the back in. I mean, as well, I mean, I'm coming forward in respect to some really, really horrendous and serious crimes. Having worked as an investigator for many years and realised the protection that we would afford our victims, our informants and our witnesses of crime, I thought the same would be afforded to me. And it was the total opposite.
Right. So you have described, and I remember this exceptionally well because I was shocked at what you were telling me. You talked about being threatened, basically, in a professional sense, and warned off within the Metropolitan Police for speaking out about what you knew. And ultimately, it got to the stage where you realised you had to leave the police force. You were trying to retire, but they didn't, at that stage, they didn't want to let you go. They were stalling. And I believe they were bringing your professional conduct into question.
Yeah, it's strange what happens, because I was also warned by other police whistleblowers that I was put in contact with, and that's namely Lenny Harper, who exposed the Hope de la Garenne, Maggie Oliver, who was the one who sort of brought forward about the Rochdale child abuse cover-ups, and they both said the same thing: look, they're going to come for you, and they'll come hard, and they did. And the onslaught was just unbelievable. But what was said to me by my sort of OPCU commander at the time, and he turned around and said, you know, you're looking at, you carry on, you're looking at losing your home, your job and your children. And as the years prevailed, you know, the next 3 years that I went through this campaign of bullying against me, There were,
led by the Metropolitan Police.
yeah, solely led by the Met Police. The words were predictive because whoever was behind it, I nearly lost my home because my wages were stopped. They tried on 3 major occasions. Each time there was 3 offences I was accused of, which was said to me by both Maggie and Lenny, look, they'll serve you what are called gross misconduct, which would, each one would have caused me to lose my job, and each one would have a dual purpose. That would be an internal investigation also, would be passed to the Crown Prosecution Service. So I nearly lost my job on 9 occasions. And also, if I can elaborate at some point, that there was a campaign, because I was bringing up 4 kids on my own, to sort of undermine my role as a parent.
Yeah, and you had some visits by police officers who came to your home, initially quite hostile to you, but I think on at least one occasion you were able to talk to them and say, more or less, come on, what you're trying to do to me is not right. So we're seeing 2 sides of the police. We're seeing the bullying side, and you were getting chinks of light with maybe some good guys.
I need to explain what happened there. Earlier on last year, one of my children was involved in a life-changing and catastrophic accident. He was in intensive care for many, many months, and he actually died twice. On the last occasion, he was pronounced dead for 7.5 minutes. I was called to the hospital, and I was actually met by a consultant who'd asked me my permission that if he doesn't pull through, because he was dead for so long, they believed he had brain damage and they couldn't ventilate him for a protracted period, would I consent to his life support being turned off? The Met Police had stopped paying me, and I had no money. I had at home a 16-year-old son, an 18-year-old son, and a 26-year-old son. My boy that was injured at the time was 21 years old, and I was sleeping in my car because he was in a specialist unit, which was many, many miles away, and I was by his side. And a colleague of mine, whilst I was at hospital, I was asked to attend an attendance management meeting as to why I wasn't returning to work, which they knew all about anyway, so it was a futile thing. And the person who went on my behalf turned around and explained to my senior management at the time, look, you need to know what's happened to John and what's happened to his son. You've got to help him, you know. And what happened to my colleague was that they served her with, they threatened to serve her, with misconduct papers for withholding information. And then that night, I actually returned home because I needed to change, I needed to sort things out. And I went home and I was met by 2 officers from the local constabulary, 2 detectives from the child abuse command there. And they wanted to interview my youngest son, who was 16. So he could independently live anyway. And he was being overlooked by a 26-year-old man, who was my oldest boy. And the allegation was of child abandonment.
Right.
But I spoke with the more senior of the 2 officers, and I said to him, you need to know my story. And when I told him, he turned around to me, and he was actually a good guy. He put his arm around me and said, listen, we've been lied to and you've been stitched up.
Yeah. So for our audience, John, this is absolutely incredible. You are the man who has the bravery to stand up and speak out about the state, agents of the state, local authorities, politicians, the Metropolitan Police, charities, children's homes, covering up the abuse of children. You have the bravery to do that, and your reward by the system is to be attacked, and even to have your family threatened and your home threatened thereby. This is quite extraordinary. Now, we've got an eye on the clock, we've got a lot to get through, but you did go to Mike Penning at one stage, who was the policing minister.
Yep.
A direct question, did he help you?
Well, as I mentioned in our initial interview, I said that he was helping me. And what he did was he raised concerns to the Home Office, and he got the Home Office to instigate an independent inquiry. I was invited to the Home Office. I took along paperwork. I met with investigators from the Home Office, and there was an official handover. And at the time, I was a bit bemused because things weren't really moving. And I said, you know, maybe he might surprise me. I can't really see what he's doing at the moment, but he might surprise me. Now, what happened was the Home Office took my paperwork and never heard from them again. Even the contact number, I rang it relentlessly. They would never answer it. Now, later in last year, the end of 2017, I met again with Mike Penning. By this time, he'd been removed from his post as policing minister, and I gave him my update, and he turned around and he couldn't apologise anymore. He said, "I'm really sorry, I've let you down." But I had genuine belief that the Home Office were helping you.
Right.
I said they've done nothing right.
So this is an important indication here. The indication is that the Home Office would do nothing. We can say that amongst many other people, the UK column wrote letters to the Home Office pointing out John's case, asking if there was going to be a proper investigation into what you were talking about. There was silence. So Mike Penning left his post. Nothing was done on the information. This is the common story with the British government, that when information on the abuse of children is put in, it goes remarkably quiet. But it was Brandon Lewis who took over from Mike Penning. And did you get the opportunity to talk to him?
No.
Well, UK column wrote an open letter to Mr. Mike Penning enclosing the audio video interview with John, and we asked Mr. Penning as to what, Brandon Lewis, what he was going to do with that information, and utter silence, no response. And it's remarkable that it's the very same MP, Brandon Lewis, who's now become chairman of the Tory party. So I'll leave our viewers and listeners to think about that. What about Nick Hurd? That's another name that's...
Well, what's happened now is that there is a Tory MP called Andrew Bridgen, who's actually been campaigning on behalf of Mike Veal, the Chief Constable of Wiltshire, right, who is doing the expose on Ted Heath. And he's approached me and he said, look, you know, this needs to be resolved. And on behalf of myself and Maggie Oliver, Andrew Bridgen wrote to Nick Hurd. Bear in mind, they're in the same party, and you know, there's only, I think, about 118 Tory MPs anyway, and wrote a lovely letter just saying these people need help, and suggested a change in the law where whistleblowers, police whistleblowers, are protected by some form of like ombudsman separate from the system.
Yeah.
And that any interference with a whistleblower constitutes a criminal offence.
Well, can I just interject there? Is that interesting, isn't it? You're reporting a crime, you're reporting a serious crime, which was the abuse of children, prostitution, drugs, underage sex, death of children. That's criminal. You know, you are reporting criminal crimes and nothing is done. And yet we're now having to produce a system to protect the whistleblower who reports the criminal activity. This is common sense on its head, or it's a deliberate attempt, in my opinion, to protect people who are abusing children.
Well, the other paradox to this is that we approached all the other agencies, the HMIC, the Inspectorate Constabularies, who said we can't interfere. The Home Office, again, we can't interfere. And we took it as far as we could, and they said, no, it's an ongoing police investigation, we can't interfere, which is absolute nonsense, because they have interfered, you know, or interjected in numerous police investigations. Yeah. I mean, the main one to note was that, you know, the Home Office got involved with the McCann case, so did the church and everything else. I mean, even people supporting me even wrote to Vincent Nichols, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, head of the Catholic Church, who said, I will do my best to help. Right. But again, turned around and said, I can't get involved. So there is nowhere to turn.
No, there's this opaque wall of nothingness the moment these crimes get reported through. Now, we mentioned Nick Hurd. Just he's taken over as policing minister from Brandon Lewis. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And has he done anything to date?
No.
No. Okay. Right. So at the moment, I believe the term is that you're being described by the police as a detrimental precedent.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, what happened is that I was put up for early retirement. And what happens is that when you go for early retirement, they've got to go through your discipline record, everything else. So every time that I was due to be put forward before the pensions agency, the Police Pensions Authority, I was served with gross misconduct papers, which means that has to be investigated. And each one could take 2 years. So bear in mind, I'm on no money. I cannot be pensioned off because I keep getting served with papers.
Right.
And in the end, I've got a report that's come back from the Crown Prosecution Service, who have turned around and officially stated that John Wedge's mitigation is so powerful, we could never successfully prosecute him. Even the CPS are on my, really the inference there is, what's going on.
Well, the inference there for me is if the CPS, if they say that, they're actually confirming the accuracy and the validity, the power of your testimony about what was happening with the children in the first place. So originally, this is my description, as a policeman who was brave enough to whistleblow on the abuse of children, the system, that's the political system, the police system, the wider establishment system, puts you in the gutter and kicks you.
Oh, yeah.
We then got to the stage where the UK column did the audio interview with you. That went everywhere.
Yeah.
Just in a couple of sentences, did that make a difference for you?
Yeah, it did. I mean, what I was told by both Lenny and Maggie that they will come for you, and one of the safety nets you're going to get is the press. And immediately after the interview, I was met by a senior officer who gave me words of advice about talking to the press, said we will not take it any further, and bizarrely enough gave me the operating practices, and what he said that actually we can't stop you talking to the press. That's what it said to me. But words of advice, you could hinder the criminal investigation.
Yeah, so this is twisting everything round now.
So this was back in, I don't know, this is back about September. It wasn't shortly after anyway, I'm getting my timeline a bit mixed up. Shortly after the interview I did with yourself, and it was resolved. However, a few months later, I got served with gross misconduct papers for talking to the UK column.
Yeah.
So they had 2 bites of the cherry with this.
Right, but ultimately, it's done the job because you've now managed to leave the police. You've retired from the police.
Well, my response to it was that if you're going to prosecute me, and I actually wrote an open letter to the Commissioner and said, prosecute me. I will refuse to accept a magistrate's court, put me before a Crown Court, because I've got the truth.
Yeah.
And the public response was unanimous in my favour.
Yeah, that's excellent. Right, now, I'll just finish on this bit. I've got a piece of paper in front of me, which is notice of alleged breach of the standards of professional behaviour. I find this a remarkable document. Basically, the Metropolitan Police was saying to you, or whatever date this paper is, that your conduct was almost bringing them into disrepute. You are the man that reports the crime. You are the man that tries to protect the children. And then the police, total policing, it says, with the Metropolitan Police logo, try and turn around and say that you are the person breaching their standards. But what the whole case shows is that the standards of the Metropolitan Police is to cover up the abuse of children and to threaten and harass, because that's the correct description, the police officer brave enough to whistleblow. It's quite an incredible story, John. What can we say that's positive? You went and went to an organisation called the Lay Community and gave a talk.
Yeah, I
just
mean,
very quickly, what happened there?
If I go on to that, I was approached by a man called Chris Lambriano, and Chris Lambriano gained notoriety back in the late 60s because he was sentenced to a long-term imprisonment with the Cray twins for the murder of Jack the Hackman Vitti. Anyway, he's a reformed gangster, really, and he's a committed Christian. He now dedicates his time helping victims of abuse by working for the Lay Community, which is a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre in Oxford. I was invited along to talk to the residents. I went along, and there was concerns actually for my safety because every single resident turned up. It's a residential rehab centre, and there were people there that had served time for murder, torture, kidnap, very, very damaged people with a history of a lot of violence behind them. And I gave a talk, and it was just unbelievable. The compassion and the backing I got from them. I got a standing ovation, and at the end of it, people coming up and hugging me and thanking me for what we did, what I'd done, you see.
And am I right in saying that a lot of this is because these are hardened criminals, but they were seeing what was clearly a straight policeman in front of them? Is that what did it?
Yeah, and it was the fact that they knew that there was someone fighting for them.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, when we look at our justice system, the recidivism rate is like 75 to 80%. And when you look at how many of them have been in the care system or been the victims of abuse, whether it be sexual, violent abuse or whatever, it's staggering.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to the abuse of children. And it's this repeating cycle, and they're just failing to address it. But when they knew that there were, I mean, I'm not alone, and this one thing that this has shown me is that I'm far from alone. I mean, the coppers that are coming forward to me and have experienced the same level of bullying, they're just hemorrhaging. They're coming from all over the place.
And are there other police coming out with information now about the abuse of children?
It is absolutely staggering. I mean, my focus is mainly on whistleblowers, police whistleblowers in respect to child abuse. There's one or two side issues that come into me, but what is apparent is, like I said on the first interview with you, there's an algorithm of bullying.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether they come from Avon and Somerset, whether they come from Strathclyde or West Mids or whatever. It's exactly the same campaign of bullying.
Right. If I try to rationalise that, why this should be, if I try and say what would cause such a thing, what I come down to is that you have an organisation, the police in its various districts, and they are covering something up. There's a sense of fear in the management. If you get a little bit above your station, you've got to be squashed because you could be dangerous. And the thing that you've pointed out is that if you take one crime that would bring large parts of the police or the establishment down, it's got to be the abuse of children.
Oh, it is.
So it's fear factor, I think, is part of this.
This is a common denominator with all of it.
What would you say to encourage other policemen and women who are perhaps seeing things but don't know whether to speak out? What would you say to them?
I'm glad you've asked me this, because I get asked this as well. And what was said to me is that John, people are frightened. This has come from other coppers, said, look, people are frightened. Now, firstly, as a police officer, you take an oath, and your oath is that you act without fear or favour. And I say, where does the fear really lie? You've got a duty in office, and you've got a moral duty as well, because we're talking about the most vulnerable in a society, which is the children. And the fear for me, it lies with, not with what I've done or what they should be doing. The real fear, for example, is that poor little kid in a kid's home, in the middle of the night is getting that blanket taken from over him. That's where the fear lies. I mean, what the police do, okay, it's a bit destabilising and it's a huge inconvenience, but you've got an oath to act without fear or favour.
Yeah.
And I say, do the right thing. Do the right thing, because anyone who attacks you for doing it, that's a criminal act, not what you're doing.
And ultimately, this is something you've got to deal with inside yourself. Your conscience said, I can't carry on without speaking out on this.
Brian, if I may quote Edmund Blake, and he made quite a profound statement. He said, in order for the triumph of evil, it takes but for good men to do nothing.
Yeah.
And that is it in a nutshell. And I'm not in a game. To do nothing is not an option. We do nothing. Children continue to be hurt.
Yeah.
We have to do something.
And that's all of us. That's not just the police. That's all of us who know. That's all of us who understand. And that's, of course, all the members of our audience that understand. It's not enough to watch a programme like this to hear the truth about what's going on. If you know what's going on but you fail to act, you've become part of the problem.
This is a festering wound that needs to be exposed to the light. Yeah. And that's what it needs. And in standing up and saying something, that's what you're doing. Right.
Now, we want to just mention a few people. Firstly, I would like to mention Melanie Shaw, very brave child abuse survivor who is now locked up in prison, doesn't know what her sentence is. She's spent well over 18 months in solitary confinement. I could do a whole programme on Melanie. We haven't got time for that. But also you've been working very closely with Bill Maloney, who of course is an extraordinary child abuse campaigner. And that led you to the Shirley Oaks case.
Yeah.
Just give us 30 seconds on why that case is so important.
Yeah, Bill has been an inspiration for me throughout, and he's been a tremendous companion. Bill himself was in his children's home, which is in South London, and it was organised by Lambeth Council. The Shirley Oaks survivors have really brought themselves together. They're being coordinated by a very brave man called Ray Stevens, and they are now taking on Lambeth Council, really. And what they're doing is taking this into the judicial process to get the justice they all deserve.
Right.
You know? And what they're doing is tremendous. And this goes to show that when people do stand up for what's right and do get together and get organised, they can move mountains.
Right, well, that's the statement, isn't it? You want to do something about this, you've got to start working together. We know that people fall out, people have differences of opinion, people have different styles, but if we're to get to grips with this, you've got to forget all of that, concentrate on the children themselves.
Brian, the support I've got from fellow whistleblowers has been brilliant, really brilliant. And the support I've got from what in the police terms would have been the them and us, the enemy, the criminals, has been equally as heartwarming.
Right.
You know, I have had just support from across the field, and whistleblowers are similar to victims and survivors in that when you stand up, you stand alone, and we shouldn't be standing alone. We should all be getting together.
Right, excellent. Now, I'm just going to mention that we've got another initiative north of the border, so in Scotland, Fresh Start, which is ordinary people saying, well, if the state isn't going to do a proper investigation into child abuse, we're going to do it. You can have a look for that on the internet, but that's a very, very important campaign, because it means ordinary people are going to do the investigation, they're going to collect the evidence, and then that evidence is going to be put into the system, and they're going to be monitoring what the prosecution system does. So I think we'll be hearing a lot more on that. So, John, many people contacted the column once we put out that audio interview. Many people contacted us. They wanted to help. People sent money for you. People sent in letters.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel when you could see public support?
It broke my heart. It was fantastic. Honest to God. I mean, the people that should have been helping me attacked me, and then I couldn't pay my bills, I couldn't do anything, and the support I got kept me alive, kept my family alive. And I have to say to everyone that contributed and all the well-meaning, it meant so much, and thank you so much. And I'm organising with Bill and a few others a campaign walk. We're going to be walking from London to Manchester, and we're going to try and raise funds to do it, but it's to raise awareness about the cover-ups, protect the whistleblowers, and support for the victims and survivors.
Right. So obviously UK Column is going to get behind that and support you, but we're going to say to our audience, we need your support and assistance. This is raising proper awareness of what's going on. And of course, the more public support John Wedger gets, the more likelihood it will be that other police whistleblowers will come forward, I think.
And politicians are coming up as well and helping, you know, and we really are moving forward.
Right.
You know.
We know a lot of viewers and listeners want good news. Yeah. You're giving us good news within this interview.
Without a doubt.
Are you seriously saying that we're at a point where, are we at a turning point?
Oh, massively.
Right.
No two ways about it, massively. And at the end of the day, those that are part of the machine to cover it up, they know what they are doing. And those that have done the crimes, they know exactly what they're doing. And we've got truth and decency on our side, and we shouldn't fear them. We shouldn't.
No.
However, it's a war of attrition, and they've got the money and the manpower to see this through. Right. Unfortunately, too many whistleblowers do give up, and I say just don't give up.
But we've got the truth, and we've got millions of good people. That's what we need to activate. Let's just end on one little point. Say as much or as little as you like. But I understand, as a result of the interview and your public profile, that you've recently been contacted by an organisation that is again saying that they've got children who've been abused are coming forward for help. And I think tomorrow or fairly shortly, you're going to be meeting up, including with an abuse survivor. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of victims, and funny enough, there's a lot of church groups and things like that. Again, people come to them. There was one woman went into a church, went up to the priest, and she'd heard the interview I did with yourself, and she asked the priest to try and locate me and just to say thank you, because she'd gone through it, and she broke down in tears and cried and said, yeah. I didn't realise there were people helping, and I'm being asked to give presentations to all manner of groups, and it really is just to sort of highlight what we're doing and try and offer the right help, where we can.
Excellent. John, I'm going to say thank you so much for coming into the studio.
No, well, thank you, and thank everyone that helped me, because it really went a long way, and I cannot thank you enough. And also the people that sort of supported Bill and myself, like Darren and Tony, some really good people, and without them, none of this would have happened.
Excellent. Well, there you are. That's the update from very brave policeman John Wedger. What a indication of the state of this nation, that the government and its agencies are prepared to cover up the abuse of children, because clearly that abuse was too close to the political and the establishment seat of power. Welcome to Britain 2018 under Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.